Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Sabah state election has delivered a fragmented but revealing verdict. Local parties dominated, GRS returned to power but without a clear majority, and urban voters sent a sharp message of dissatisfaction. So amid all of these messages, how will these results shape state and federal political dynamics going forward? Joining me on the show to discuss this further is Dr Arnold Puyok, who is a visiting senior fellow at the Swee Hock Southeast Asia Centre at the London School of Economics. Dr. Arnold, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. What do you see as the core message that Sabahans had sent through this election, through the results of the elections, when you look at all of what the results revealed to you? How are you interpreting them?
Yeah, so basically, the first message that Sabahans wanted to convey is that they voted for candidates who deliver. They voted for candidates who are seen more on the ground. They voted for candidates who are consistently close to the community. So this is where I think GRS, as the incumbent government, had a real advantage. And number two, I think the voters are not swayed by lofty promises. I think what is important for them is they want to see a government or candidates who really work on the ground in order to help them to solve practical problems or offering practical solutions like infrastructure, bread and butter issues, and things like that. And number three, which is quite significant, is the Sabah for Sabahan slogan. The Sabah first sentiment seems like resonated to a certain extent. This explains why parties like PN, BH were defeated in the election. So I think these are three core messages which the voters wanted to basically convey to everybody.
Right. Okay. Well, so let's walk through those three key messages that you laid out. So let's talk the first one. Candidates that deliver, candidates that were seen to be helping grassroots, to be seen on the ground. Talk to me about that, because to what extent did it appeared that, you know, the corruption appears to have very limited electoral impact. So does it matter more that the candidates are seen to be either incumbent or helping the people on the ground, helping voters on the ground, as opposed to whether the corruption scandals influence voting behavior, whether or not that played a part in voting behavior?
Yeah, because if you look at the seats in Sabah, right? Most of the seats are in the rural areas. These are the areas where infrastructure needs are really pressing, right? So the rural voters wanted a government, candidates who can help them fix this problem, bread and issue problem, right? That's number one. And number two, of course, when I go to the ground, I ask the people about this corruption issue. At first, they say that they're quite concerned about it. But in the end, this is what they told me. They told me that all politicians are like that. It's just that some are not yet caught doing the act in the video. And it's so unfortunate that the current politicians are caught doing it in the video. But then again, it does not mean that the previous one didn't do it. So I'm not saying that, perhaps we can say that it's already quote unquote accepted as a culture. But what matters to the people, especially in the rural area, is that if you deliver, if you can help the people to solve their practical problems, then whether or not you're involved in corruption, it does not really matter. And when we talk about incumbency advantage, right? What I mean by this is that when you are an incumbent, you have access to resources. You are close to the government. You are working with the government, so you can use that influence in order to serve or to deliver the public goods to the people. So this
Okay.
gives the GRS the advantage.
Okay. You in the
Not only,
second.
not only, yeah, sorry, yeah,
Sorry.
yes,
Please
yeah,
finish your thought.
yeah, because they have the incumbency advantage. It's easier for them to mobilize support,
And
especially in the rural areas. Yeah.
understood. In the second message that you raised, you said that voters were not swayed by lofty promises. Can you elaborate what you mean by that?
Yeah, because when political parties share their election promises, right? We even ask the people whether or not they are basically drawn to any political parties with nice manifestos. But this is what they tell us. They say that no, we are not really interested in election promises or election manifestos, right? Because everybody can come up with manifestos, but nobody can really seriously fulfill them, right? But what is working, based on our observation, is that what is working is candidate who uh, basically show their track record. It's not manifesto. Candidates who show their track record, what they have done, and what they hope to achieve if they were elected again. So I think that is working more effectively rather than just showing your manifestos to the people.
Okay, so no longer
Yeah.
promises no longer
No,
make the cut, right?
you know,
It's your
Melissa,
track record.
nobody is reading the manifestos. I tell you, nobody. Perhaps from 10 people, only perhaps one or two read them seriously. The rest
Mm,
don't care.
okay, so it's a track record of what you've done on the ground.
Exactly. Yes.
Talk to me about the Sabah First Clarion call. How much of the results was really a referendum on the Peninsula political parties and the coalition and the federal leadership of some of these political parties? How are you interpreting the Sabah for Sabahans? How much that resonated with voters this time around?
Yeah, it seems like it is not widespread in terms of its influence because, again, coming back to the issue of delivery, what is important is your ability to deliver the public goods, right? Now, fortunately for GRS, they also have this Sabah First sentiment with them. They are trying to promote it, and only later UPCO came into the picture and used this as well. I mean, they say they used it out of principle, but I think they use it because they wanted to survive. They are a small party, they have to have something which they can sell to the electorate in order to gain support. Now, whether or not it has got some impact, especially on the national party, yes, because voters seems to prefer local-based parties to lead Sabah. But whether or not the impact is widespread, that is secondary. I do not think the impact is widespread because if you look at the number of candidates who lost their deposit, in fact, local-based parties lost their deposit more than the national-based parties. And in fact, if you look at Pakatan Harapan, out of I can't remember how many candidates contesting, actually, there were only two candidates losing their deposit. Yeah. The rest, they managed to reach the threshold of not losing their deposit, which
Okay.
means that PH has got some best time support in Sabah, which can help them to grow in the future.
Okay, so having said that, what lessons do you think Anwar Ibrahim and his administration, his regime, should take away? What lessons should they take from the results of the sub elections? When you most of the framing of following the results have been that PH was really trounced, that DAP really was, suffered a huge setback and should be taking some lessons. How are you reading it? What lessons do you think Anwar should take from the results?
Look, do not take governance for granted. That's number one. Do not take governance for granted. People are really not happy in terms of how issues of corruption, issues of governance are handled here in Sabah. Of course, you only see that impact in the urban areas among the Chinese areas, but if it is not controlled, it's going to affect him in the long run. Number two, federal presence and political alone are not really enough, because if you come to Sabah, right, you see a lot of posters with Anwar saying sayang PM, sayang Sabah, and all that. That also was not enough to gain the support of Sabahan. So for PH, I think they need to seriously invest in leadership development in Sabah, especially PKR, start to groom leaders, train new leaders if they are serious about wanting to gain a significant foothold in Sabah. I'm not saying that they are totally drowned, or I'm not saying that PKR is totally collapsed. No. As I mentioned to you earlier, right? Only two of the candidates lose their deposit.
Right.
So, which means that in terms of best support, grassroots support is still there. Yeah.
Okay, and what do you think is next for Sabah when you look at the new administration that's been announced, the new cabinet as well? What do you think should be their priorities, and what pressures do you expect this new state government to face?
Yeah. I wanted to say that earlier before this interview, right? I was hoping that Haji would start with the cabinet, right? He would form a strong cabinet, people who are not tainted with allegations of corruptions or implicated in issues of corruptions. But you look at the list of cabinet members that he appointed. So actually, to say that he is serious or not about dealing with governance issue, I'm not too sure, but it seems like he is not. So number one is governance issue is very important, governance reform. Number two, I think what the new government should do is to really reform the civil service. And the reason why Sabah is lagging behind, the reason why we have a lot of infrastructural problem, because our civil service is not effective. So real and bold reform must be done in the civil service. So these two are quite crucial for Sabah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your analysis with us. That was Dr. Arnold Puyok, visiting senior fellow from LSE. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. Let's continue our analysis of Sabah's election outcome as we look at the broader political implications from coalition stability to the pressures facing the incoming state government. Joining me now is Dr Bridget Welsh, who is with the Asia Research Institute at University of Nottingham Malaysia. Bridget, thank you so much for coming on the show. I know you've just come back from Sabah. What stood out to you as the most defining trend in this election? I mean, particularly in terms of voter sentiment and the political mood across the state.
I think there are three things that I'd really highlight. I mean, everybody knows it's all about, this was an election about local parties. And I think that, but I think a lot of people in Peninsular Malaysia don't understand that this is not really as much as an anti-Malaya sentiment as people would talk about. It's more about getting them the things that they deserve, the revenue that they need for basic needs, the issue to address the kind of the gaps in terms of infrastructure, right? And they look to Sarawak as being able to actually deliver economic development and to have more voice and more power to control their own livelihoods. And so I think this sentiment was very strong. I think the second thing that people don't fully appreciate is that there was an undercurrent about a real push for change. And that change came through youth mobilization, youth voting, youth candidates. And I think that this is something that perhaps the current government in Sabah has yet to fully appreciate, that a lot of the seats were driven by the dynamics of younger people. A good example of that is Karumbunai, where PAS won, had 41% of younger voters. And this, and the margin was very close. And that's people under 30 41%. So you have to understand that this is partly a factor that's shaping the dynamic of Sabah politics. And the third thing that I think is important to appreciate is that the power of incumbency. And incumbency is not just about having money and resources, although I think clearly the GRS had the most money and resources in their campaign. I think the other factor is that people wanted to have access to government. And this again speaks to the vulnerabilities or the sense, as well as a certain degree of sense of wanting to stay steady, to not have uncertainty. And so they vote for those in power, and GRS had the best campaign to define themselves as the government in a time when everyone is claiming to be part of the government.
Bridget, so talk to me about the first message that you talked about, the fact that local parties dominated, but it really wasn't an anti-Malaya sentiment, or not as strong as it's been portrayed in mainstream media. When you look at the new state cabinet that's just been sworn in, we see the inclusion of PH and UMNO Barisan Nasional reps in the state cabinet. How do you reconcile that with the kind of Sabah first sentiment versus the push for Sabahans to get what they need? How local is this cabinet really?
Okay, so let's first unpack the first part. I do think one cannot dismiss the fact that there was anti-Peninsula Malaysia sentiment, right? And I think there was genuine anger. I think particularly there was anger at comments about the appeal of the 40%. There was anger about the top-down sort of colonial type of attitude that, Sabahans should follow. I mean, Sabahans basically send that very clear message that they're tired of being treated as second-class citizens, or even for some of them, third-class citizens vis-a-vis Sarawak. And I think that message needs to be understood, and I think in that context. But I would also say that not all of this is negative. I mean, I think people paint this as a black and white situation, that federal-state relationship, when one gets power, the other one doesn't. It's not that way. Both groups can be empowered if you find a way to sort of give the funds, and perhaps over a longer period of time. And a stronger Sabah is a stronger Malaysia. A stronger Malaysia is a stronger Malaysia for everyone, not just one place versus the other. So I think this is the way that I'm trying to describe this, is to acknowledge that it's not one or the other. Now, in the cabinet, we can see that there is two conflicting pressures. The Sabah First movement, which I think was pretty clear, both Warisan adopted it, but also they were particularly, they had party local in this phrase, right? And UPCO pushed it. Those things were there, and they still talk about having a local party-driven agenda and voices to set that. But I also think that pressure is at the same time with the fact that they need to have a relationship with the federal government in order to be able to engage in negotiations, to have dialogue and discussions. And so therefore you see the cabinet accommodating a bit of both. Predominantly in the major positions, particularly the major ministry positions, as well as the DCM positions, as well as the CM-ship. These are local party members, defined as not having any connection to Peninsula Malaysia, such as Barisan Nasional or DAP or Pakatan PKR, for example. And then there are some other ministry positions and assistant ministry positions that are given to other parties to maintain that bridge. And I think that, Sabah politics has always been about a process of accommodation, a process of bridge building, even when you have to deal with the issues of policy implementation. Unlike Sarawak, Sabah has more dependent on the federal government because of the civil servants are from the federal government. We can see that there is a different financial arrangement. And I think that is part of what Sabah is trying to change, but also to redefine with a particular stronger voice at the table.
Right. Bridget, you've written some analysis on the results of the Sabah elections. In the first part of your analysis, you wrote about the Warisan wave, and I'm curious to know more about why Warisan performed so strongly in the urban areas. And this ties into what you said about the push for change. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
So I think it's important to put the context of Warasan's performance in the emergence and the history of the party. When it emerged in 2018, you saw that it won 29 seats. I mean, and it was a real dynamism, and it won seats in the northern parts of Sabah, as well as the even parts of the interior. It was a real wave that was more holistic. That now we can see that the ethnic politics in Sabah has really defined some of the limitations of where they get the support. Particularly, they don't necessarily win from high levels of KDM support. But what they did do in this campaign is they managed to win many seats along the East Coast, especially in places like Sandakan. And then they also won seats in the places in the urban areas in the West Coast, particularly in KK. And this came from the narrative that they said, we will be forming the government. And also they were also the most articulate and the most local out of all of the options. And I think that Shafi Abdul's campaign was a strength in terms of it having this clear message. It was also a weakness in the sense that he wasn't able to find support from other different types of regions. And that while he got 25 seats, which were 2 more than he won in 23, I think that he did not have the same breadth associated with the representation. The numbers were higher for everyone else. I also think that Warasan didn't have a plan B as carefully articulated as GRS did. GRS not only was able to get a majority, but they were very quick in being able to form a government. They had already put things in place much more quickly. I think Warasan still was going into this with a sense that they were going to get the numbers, which I think it was a sense that I think is overhyped. And then also there's discussion about Warasan in terms of winning the most votes. Well, of course, anybody who wins in the urban areas wins the most votes. Right? So I think but they didn't win the most seats. And keep in mind that 25 is not, is only a small share, not even quite a little bit over a third of the 73.
Okay, so the quantum, the number of seats matters. Bridget, talk to me about Pakatan Harapan. So there's been, descriptions of a trouncing of PKR and DAP. Are there lessons for Pakatan Harapan from the results of these elections?
I think one has to distinguish between PKR and DAP. I think, but bottom line is that they were the groups that were punished. And in particular, the PMX Sayang Sabah campaign, which was not articulated in a way that people could connect to. So you're saying they're giving you money, but in fact, the problems are there. So they say 1 billion for water and people don't have water. So there's like a real disconnect between the promises of allocations and the actual reality on the ground. And then there's also the question of the discourse of how it's being said. Like, I'm giving it to you as if you didn't deserve it, right? Like you're getting it as a present. All right. And this is, and there was the sense that they were talked down to, again, that third-class citizenship in terms of how it was said, the messaging in these processes. And I think that particular element, along with a question of trust about the questions of the 40%, really had a tremendous red anger against Harapan. And DAP was in the firing line because they were in many of the urban seats. But keep in mind, PKR also didn't do well. And it's important to understand that the one PKR representative really isn't a member of PKR because he was a member of UMNO and PGRS until very recently. And I think that, he's now perhaps a member of PKR and he represents the party. But the fact is that almost nobody who came from PKR within the state really had a lot of the seats were at the state level, and equally important, they didn't necessarily have a voice. And I think both DAP and PKR are going to have to face serious reflections on their performance. And also, I think that this is a time for the federal government parties, those in government, to think about how it treats and engages with Sabah. If you treat them as secondary, you're going to get a blowback. And I think this was a very clear message. The anger against Pakatan Harapan was palpable. People would be shouting in these circumstances, which, this is not this is not the way Sabahans often react, and you can see from the numbers the level of swing. So, for example, there was a Chinese and KDM swing in the urban areas, a Chinese swing of 40% away from DAP. And what they had, that resulted in all 8 seats. It didn't matter, even good performing aduns, all gone. As you said, bungkus, everything's finished. All right, all wrapped up and finished. And then you had a situation where, candidates in the safe, quote unquote, safe seats in urban areas for Pakatan Harapan also left. And keep in mind that this speaks to the base of both Pakatan Harapan and PKR, DAP and PKR, and Pakatan Harapan generally, as in terms of the implication nationally. And it was also, unfortunately, for Anwar Ibrahim, who made this campaign about his pictures, it was also interpreted as a message sent to him and to his governance, which I think is a real challenge that calls for deep reflection, not just saying your reflection, but actual reflection.
Right. Bridget, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I could talk to you about Sabah politics for far longer, but that's all the time we have on this episode of Consider This. Thank you so much for sharing some of your insights with us. That was Dr. Bridget Welsh from the Asia Research Institute at University of Nottingham Malaysia, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.